Shibai Otsutuki is one of the most mysterious characters in the Boruto manga. There's a lot that hasn't been revealed about his origins, his motives, and his true power. So today we're going to compile the best Shibai theories ever made into one video. I hope you guys enjoy. At number 1, we have Shibai is future Boruto.
This story begins several years earlier.
You see, there have been so many videos about Shibai's true identity. Some believe that he's Momoshiki in disguise, some believe that he's Amado, some even believe that he's just a random background character influencing the events of Boruto's timeline. All of these theories are indeed plausible, but there's one that stands out. In fact, I've made videos in the past about this very thing, which is Boruto himself being Shibai. Now you guys might be saying, if I've made videos on this already, what's the purpose of this one? Well, the answer to that question is that I've made a new discovery. You see, the difference between that theory and this one is the very foundation it was built on, which is that Boruto is Shibai's reincarnate. So in a sense, he's the continuation of someone that existed in the past, his next life per se. While this new theory takes on a different approach, in that Boruto isn't Shibai's reincarnate. He is and always was Shibai himself. Now this might seem a bit confusing, but let me explain. You see, there's this concept in time travel known as a causal loop or the bootstrap paradox. This is in essence a situation in which an object or piece of information is sent back in time and becomes the cause of its own existence, creating a closed loop. Essentially, there's no clear origin for the item itself. It appears to have always existed because it is a part of a self-perpetuating cycle. In fact, something similar to this has happened in the Boruto universe, which I've mentioned before in prior videos. This took place when Boruto and Sasuke traveled back in time. The younger version of Denki's father, the creator of the train system in the future, overheard Boruto talking about a train system that hadn't yet existed, which inspired him to then create said train system. The future version of himself later attributes the idea for the train system to the random kid he interacted with years prior. That of course being the kid Boruto who traveled to the past. That itself is the bootstrap paradox, since if Boruto learned about it because Denki's father created it, and Denki's father created it because he overheard Boruto talking about it, there's no clear origin to the train system. It's a closed causal loop. It's a paradox. Now this gets even crazier when you apply it to Shibai, and it all goes back to a constant theme in the Boruto anime, which is that it tends to foreshadow later events of the manga. Whether it's Kagemasa's evil eye, a clear reference to Boruto's Jogan, Harami's introduction which had him encased in a Jogan-shaped container with a scar above his right eye, which of course foreshadows the scar Boruto later receives in the manga, and even the clones Shin created that he viewed as tools, but in the end turned against him, similar to Code's situation with the Clog Rhymes and the Shinju. There are many such cases where the anime hints towards later plotlines, and this bootstrap paradox is no different. But precisely how does it apply to Boruto and Shibai? Well, I believe that current Boruto will eventually become Shibai after evolving into his new Otsutsuki form. He will then travel to the past and become the Shibai known throughout history, thus ensuring the continued existence of the timeline. Now you guys might be saying this doesn't make sense because why would Boruto need to become the Shibai of the past when Shibai existed long before Boruto was born? And you guys would be 100% correct in saying that. But that's why it's a paradox. Boruto was always destined to become Shibai and travel to the past to ensure his future. He is the catalyst that spawned the events which led to the present, and without him the timeline would cease to exist. So he must adhere to his destiny and complete the loop. This is of course the ultimate enemy Boruto faces as decreed by Toneri in the anime, Destiny. Destiny was always his true opponent, something he can't overcome with brute force and must shoulder by himself. Now how does this tie into Kawaki? I did say this explains the Age of Shinobi is overlined in chapter 1, but how? Well, it all goes back to what happens to a timeline if a closed loop is broken. In this case, it could either result in a new timeline where things are different, or it could result in the timeline's total destruction. Now, to understand the full weight behind Boruto's decision, I want to explain in detail what I believe will happen. So sometime in the future, everyone comes to learn of this decision Boruto must make. Either continue on the path to evolution or destroy the loop. If Boruto chooses to evolve, he must travel to the past to ensure the loop cycle continues. He does this by taking the name Shibai, which by the way means playing a role. So Boruto plays the role of Shibai by first infiltrating the home of the Otsutsuki, and after building rank among them, he later directs them to Earth's sector, which is what led to Kaguya and Ishiki's arrival in the first place. This ensures that the timeline which created the shinobi system is born, which also ensures Boruto's birth. The sad part is that he's still Boruto, but he can't live a normal life. He can only watch from afar as to not tamper with the timeline. So he becomes sad and lonely, which is why he discards his body and ascends to a higher plane of existence. The crazy part about this is that he did this under the guise of ascending to godhood through the consumption of chakra fruits, and left instructions to the Otsutsuki for them to do the same thing. So the reason why the Otsutsuki consume planets to gather chakra fruits is because Boruto, who's now Shibai, told them how to do it. He didn't just tell them the location of the planet, he gave them a reason to go there. That's because for the events of Boruto to happen, Kaguya, Momoshiki, and Ishiki must arrive on the planet in search of said chakra fruit. So those chain of events only occur if Boruto travels back in time to be the catalyst, thus ensuring the never-ending cycle. So Boruto has a very big decision to make, ensuring the timeline plays out as it always has, despite knowing that he'll be damned to a miserable life, or break the loop and risk erasing all his loved ones from existence. Very tough. Now, where Kawaki comes in is actually very simple. You see, we know Kawaki hates the shinobi system. He thinks they're weak fodder that simply die on the front lines. He suffered in poverty because of that very system as well, which makes this very personal. He also despises the Otsutsuki because all they've ever brought is destruction and suffering. Whether it's for him or the people he cares about, it's all the same. What this means is that it's in Kawaki's best interest to stop Boruto from fulfilling his destiny. If he succeeds, the Otsutsuki as we know it would cease to exist, since Boruto never went back in time to give them their mission of collecting fruits. The shinobi system also wouldn't exist since it was spawned from Kaguya's arrival and Hagoromo giving chakra to humans. So stopping Boruto fulfills Kawaki's goals that were established in part 1, ending the Age of Shinobi and ending the reign of the Otsutsuki, at least as we know it. And he does this by sending Boruto where he sent the 7th, which of course is a dimension where time doesn't flow. So since Boruto is in a dimension where time doesn't flow, he can't influence time, nor will he ever evolve to the point where he could. Now one could say, why doesn't Kawaki just kill Boruto to ensure that this never happens? Well, that could be because he simply grows to care about him and would rather seal him away. Or it could also be the case that he can't be killed. You see, if Boruto is truly essential to completing the loop, meaning the entire timeline depends on him becoming Shibai and going back in time, then yes, the timeline would certainly protect him to preserve itself. This could manifest in attacks on Boruto always being interrupted by someone or something, an ally arriving just in time as seen with Kawaki, or an enemy being distracted by another conveniently pressing matter, as seen when Jiro left to go revive Hidari, which he himself attributed to Boruto being protected by divine intervention. Some believe that this is Shibai now actively influencing these events from a higher plane of existence, but that isn't the case. The truth is that the timeline itself is protecting Boruto because without him, it would cease to exist. So Kawaki must find a loophole around killing Boruto because that action itself is blocked by fate, which of course leaves us with Daikokuten, a dimension where time doesn't flow. So in essence, if Boruto is removed from time itself, it can no longer protect him, which means he could end Boruto in that time space. This ensures that all the things that Kawaki hates about this world never occurs, and he's willing to end everything if there's even a small chance that Naruto might get to live in a world absent of these threats. The problem, of course, is that the chance is very small. Yes, breaking a causal loop could result in the history being rewritten to where the events caused by that loop didn't occur. So Earth would just be a normal planet with no superpowered humans or god trees and the Otsutsuki. Just the normal strife between mankind, which I'm sure Kawaki is aware of, but deems preferable to what they have now. The flip side of this is the total destruction of the timeline itself, and everyone simply ceases to exist because it becomes too unstable, which actually is more likely. Boruto doesn't want to take that risk, but Kawaki does, which is what leads to that conflict. At this point, everything should start to make sense. Boruto is a star of hope against the destruction that will eventually come to pass, as stated by Toneri. And Kawaki, of course, is the apostle of destruction, as stated in the Boruto database, because his actions would result in the destruction of the timeline. So Boruto's real opponent is destiny, because if he doesn't find a way to change it without the destruction of the timeline, he's bound to a miserable existence. So playing the role of Shibai, the past, the present, the future, it's all interconnected, which is crazy. But you know what's also crazy? Only 22% of you guys subscribing to the channel, and only 2 of you currently being a member. Shoutouts to Iki and Christian, by the way. In any case, if you guys are enjoying the videos, consider supporting the channel so I can continue to, make them. With that said, let's get back to the video. Now, given what I said before, it all makes sense why Boruto's horn looks like Shibai despite receiving his karma from Momoshiki. It isn't because he's a descendant of Shibai or because he received Shibai cells. No, it's because Boruto had Otsutsuki DNA prior to receiving Momoshiki's karma, since he's a descendant of Kaguya. So that data mixed with Momoshiki's and Kinshiki's, thus creating a brand new horn with elements of all of that data. So Boruto doesn't have that horn because of Shibai. Shibai has that horn because of Boruto, because Boruto becomes Shibai. At this point in time, his evolution into Shibai has already begun. That's why he hasn't heard from Momoshiki in over 2 years, and why he can't use the Karma Seal without losing himself. They're slowly merging into one entity, which began with their brainwaves crossing over. And once this process is complete, a new evolution will occur, thus the birth of Shibai. Now, you might be wondering why this happens. Why will Momoshiki merge with Boruto and create this new form? Well, that part is actually quite simple. It all goes back to Boruto himself being part Otsutsuki and strongly inheriting their power. We have to remember that Momoshiki evolved to this state after consuming Kinshiki and merging his essence with him. A similar process is taking place with Momoshiki and Boruto, because you have Boruto's innate Otsutsuki essence merging with Momoshiki's, which will in the end result in the creation of a new form. This form might be controlled by Boruto's consciousness, or might be a completely different person, who is the result of both personalities of Momoshiki and Boruto merging into one. With that said, this also explains some other similarities as well. Some have pointed out that the ability Shibai uses in this panel looks similar to Rasengan Uzuhigo. Well, that's because it is Rasengan Uzuhigo, since Boruto is Shibai. Some have pointed out that the damage to Shibai's clothing on his right hand looks very similar to the damage to Boruto's clothing in the flash forward scene. And that, I believe, is because it is after this fight that Boruto evolves into this new form. It would also rip apart his pants, which explains the tattered look from the back, but of course I could be reaching there and it's not really that relevant to the overall theory. By the way, I also noticed that this garment is somewhat different from this one in this panel, because this one is ripped apart and this one isn't, which could imply that this one is from when he just transformed and this one is after he went back into the past, and that would make sense since this one was used to explain how he ascended, which we know happens in the past, not the future. I also think that this panel being a future event implies that Jura will succeed in cultivating the divine tree, likely using a KB as the Otsutsuki substitute. And Boruto of course will gain the power to stop it after evolving, which could be a part of the entire closed loop. So Boruto must evolve into Shibai to save the planet, and must also go back in time to ensure that all the events play out as they should, so that this moment happens. It's kinda crazy. Now finally, there's also the Jogan and its connection to Ada and Daemon. I've always said that it's strange how Ada's Senrigan is a crescent moon and Daemon has a half moon, and of course Boruto's Jogan is a full moon, which led me to believe that Amado was trying to recreate the Jogan. And then of course when we saw Shibai for the first time, that then changed to Shibai has the Jogan and Ada and Damon's dojutsu are simply pieces of the puzzle because of course they have Shibai's cells. Now that is still partly true, but it makes more sense now that we know Boruto is Shibai and he left his body where it would be discovered so that Ada and Damon would be able to receive his cells. Same for Kashin Koji, who now has prescience because of Shibai's cells, and he's using that power to help Boruto in his journey to becoming Shibai. What this means is that Boruto in the future will have the power to use the Senringan, Damon's reflection, prescience, and omnipotence all by himself, which is likely how Boruto will reverse the effects of omnipotence. In fact, we've seen Boruto use a Senringan-esque ability with the Jogan in part 1, when he was able to see and hear what Shikadai was saying from another dimension, which is the Noe dimension by the way, which is something Ada can do with her dojutsu. So again, the anime is just rich with foreshadowing, and I'm sure I could find more if I watched all of it, but I don't think I will. At number 2, we have Shibai killed Kaguya.
I shall rule over this entire world, together with my children.
Kaguya and Shibai Otsutuki, two of the most mysterious characters in the Boruto universe. See, whether it's when Kaguya arrived on the planet who she fed to the Ten Tails, omnipotence being used in the past, and even divine intervention being a concept in the universe itself, every single thing is connected and it all leads back to one person. That person being Shibai. You see, this has been driving me crazy for the longest time. Why did Momoshiki refer to the planet as Kaguya's world, not Ishiki's? He never once referenced Ishiki's existence for some reason, and this is of course very interesting given the fact that Kaguya was stated to be a lower ranked Otsutsuki. So if anything, this should be Ishiki's world, and this is of course backed up by the fact that he's above Kaguya on the Otsutsuki tablet. So what gives? Well, the obvious answer is that the Otsutsuki knew that Kaguya killed Ishiki, but not in the way that you might think. You see, I believe that Ishiki was a rogue Otsutsuki, and so was Shibai, but we'll get to that part in a bit. Now, the reason why this makes perfect sense is because it was established that Otsutsukis aren't allowed to kill other Otsutsuki members without permission. This was stated by Urashiki Otsutsuki when he confronted Toneri on the moon. So it can't be the case that Kaguya killed Ishiki just because she wanted to, and the clan just didn't do anything about it. And again, the clan definitely knew that she did it since Momoshiki called it Kaguya's world instead of Ishiki's. However, the fact that when Urashiki explained what happened to Kaguya and the Ten Tails, he never questioned what happened to Ishiki. It just goes on to say that Kaguya will be punished for consuming the chakra fruit instead of bringing it back to the clan. So clearly, they knew that Ishiki was no longer present, and if that is the case, it is obvious that Kaguya told them. What this means is that Kaguya betrayed Ishiki because she was told to do so, not because she wanted the chakra fruit as Amado theorized. That is why the world is now referred to as Kaguya's, and also why she was to bring the chakra fruit back to the clan, not Ishiki. So what I think happened is that the clan ordered Ishiki's execution because he planned on taking the fruit for himself, which was of course prohibited, at least for this planet. This is also backed up by the fact that Ishiki's entire plan in present time was to cultivate another divine tree on the planet and consume the fruit it produces. His end goal was to become an Otsutsuki god similar to Shibai, which is the will he passed on to Code. So Ishiki's current plan was the same as his old one, which was to disobey the clan and take power for himself. Now as for Kaguya, she also betrayed the clan as well, likely because she fell in love with humans as displayed in her backstory. This is also said to be the case by Urashiki when reporting to Momoshiki. She then went on to consume the fruit herself as a way to defend against these humans, which of course puts her in a similar position to Ishiki. Kaguya knew that once the clan found out, they would send Otsutsukis to get rid of her, and she knew exactly who they would send. This was confirmed when Sasuke decoded Kaguya's scroll, which listed the names of Momoshiki and Kinshiki as the ones who would descend upon the land. Now, the only way this makes sense for Kaguya to know this is if Momoshiki was also assigned to this sector of the universe. So if they were to send anyone, it would be these guys. And this is also backed up by the Otsutsuki tablet in Jigen's dimension. It displays the symbols of 6 Otsutsukis, one pair being Momoshiki and Kinshiki, the other one being Ishiki and Kaguya, while the last one is still unknown. This place likely exists as a terminal in which the Otsutsukis of this sector used to communicate over long distances, or just a monument used to stamp their presence and claim over this realm. So that explains why Kaguya knew about Momoshiki and Kinshiki, but what about these guys? Well, that's where Shibai comes in. You see, if one assumes that Shibai is indeed one of the missing Otsutsuki, it would also explain why his existence was revealed to us in chapter 75, and also why Amado had possession of his body. As you guys know, Amado presented the theory himself that Shibai was either killed or ascended to a higher plane of existence, and the latter was backed up by Momoshiki, saying that what Amado said about Shibai is true. He's no longer in this dimension. This of course then begs the question, how did Amado gain access to Shibai's corpse? Well, the obvious answer to that is Ishiki, which also then leads back to Kaguya. You see, this kind of brings multiple theories together because I did make a video 2 years ago explaining that Ishiki's dojutsu stems from Shibai, meaning Ishiki literally took Shibai's dojutsu from his body and implanted it into his own. That is why Shibai's dojutsu has a triangle similar to Ishiki's, which can also reduce the amount of triangles present as seen with Ishiki in chapter 56 and also Kawaki later on in chapter 65. Now, what also points to this being the case is the fact that Otsutsukis normally possess a pair of the same dojutsu. This was the case where Kaguya, Momoshiki, Kinshiki, and Orishiki who all possessed a pair of Byakugans specifically, as it's the base dojutsu of the Otsutsuki. The only person this doesn't apply to is Shibai, who coincidentally has a dojutsu similar to that of Ishiki's, the same person who has access to Shibai's body. Now, this wasn't outright stated to be the case, but it does make sense that Ishiki was the one who provided Amado with the cells of Shibai and also told him the story of his evolution. It wouldn't make sense for Ishiki not to know that Amado was using the cells of Shibai to strengthen his cyborgs, since every member of Kara received them, as confirmed by Kashin Koji. Some of these guys even surpass the power of Jigen, which would warrant some type of explanation. So the most likely case is that Kaguya and Ishiki, upon arriving on the planet, discovered Shibai's corpse, which Ishiki then extracted his dojutsu from, and then stored his corpse inside his newly awakened timeless dimension. Now, the timeline here is very important since Ishiki had to have taken the dojutsu before his battle with Kaguya, since that's what he used to shrink to a very small size. So Shibai's dojutsu, now being a part of Ishiki's body, would now be a part of the data backed up to karma, which would then be implanted onto Kawaki. Now, with that said, how does this lead to Shibai killing Kaguya? Well, this leads us back to the Tentals. You see, Amado explained that the Otsutsuki normally travel in pairs, since one is to be fed to the Tentals, while the other one watches over the tree until it bears the fruit. Now, the Tentals itself is brought to the planet by said Otsutsuki as a seedling, which implies that Kaguya and Ishiki brought the Tentals to Boruto's planet. This was of course contradicted in Kaguya's backstory as depicted in Naruto's anime. For one, Kaguya didn't arrive on the planet with Ishiki, nor did she plant the Tentals. It is outright stated by Kaguya's friend that the god tree had been there for over several millennia. So given the glaring inconsistencies, one would come to the conclusion that this is a plot hole, but is that really true? Well, not necessarily. You see, this is certainly a retcon, but retcons can make sense if aligned properly with what came before. So for this to make sense, we first need to understand that Amado doesn't have first-hand knowledge on what happened in the past. He's simply telling us what someone else told him, that person likely being Ishiki Otsutsuki. You have to also consider that Amado saying that Ishiki arrived on the planet along with Kaguya could more so be his interpretation of Ishiki saying that he and Kaguya came to the planet. This of course doesn't mean that they arrived on the planet at the exact same time. Ishiki could have arrived even hours or days after Kaguya. There's also the fact that Momoshiki sent Kinshiki ahead of him to inspect Kaguya's world, which is how he knew that the space curvature exceeded 16. So Ishiki could have done the same thing with Kaguya and arrived at a later time. It could be the case that they did come to the planet with the intention of planting a divine tree, but one was already there as shown in the anime. This makes perfect sense since Ishiki for some reason still possesses a juvenile Tentale separate from the one in Shippuden, which created the chocolate fruit Kaguya consumed. So if the original god tree wasn't planted by Kaguya and it had been there for over several millennia, who planted it? Well, you guys get the point. It's Shibai. Now, I personally believe that Shibai and his partner were the other two missing Otsutsukis assigned to this sector of the universe, thus also being a part of the Otsutsuki tablet. They both then went rogue in their goal to achieve godhood by consuming every chakra fruit instead of bringing it back to the clan. Thus their monuments being destroyed in what we call Jigen's dimension, signifying their fall from grace with the Otsutsuki. Which also explains why Shibai's garment is different from every Otsutsuki we've seen so far. Instead of the typical pristine white garment, he cloaks himself in black tattered clothing, signifying his rebellion. So the final fruit Shibai consumed before his ascension was the one formed by the original god tree, thus Ishiki finding his body on the planet. This implies that Shibai either fed his partner to the god tree without him being able to find a suitable vessel, which explains his absence, Or it could also be the case that in his lust for power, Shibai consumed his partner similar to what Momoshiki did to Kinshiki, then later fed himself to the god tree and resurrected using his own karma. This of course likely happened before getting to this planet, thus explaining the absence of Shibai's partner. You know, I'd bet that the reason why Shibai has two different dojutsus is because one of them belonged to his partner. That would also explain why he has the black markings on his face similar to when Momoshiki consumed Kinshiki, so that is something to think about. And also, there's this belief that the 10 tails can only produce one chakra fruit because Amado said that it would destroy the planet. Now this obviously isn't the case since Kage consumed a fruit from the god tree and the planet wasn't destroyed. In fact, at least 20 years after the fact, the god tree was still amassing chakra to form another chakra fruit as stated by the Toad Sage. This likely means that the god tree can get multiple fruits from a planet before it runs out of energy to give. So yeah, Shibai could have gotten a chakra fruit from the same planet that went on to produce another one. Now, where this gets a bit wonky is Shibai being responsible for Kaguya's demise. You see, there's some contradictions in Kaguya's backstory which opened my eyes to a few things. As mentioned by Reddit user Borusumi, there is something weird about the Toad Sage Gamamura possessing unique abilities at that point in time. He also had what's known as a memory stone which allowed him to observe past events, which is very similar to the ability of Ada's Semiragon, which of course derives from Shibai. Now, I'm not saying that Gamamura is Shibai, but he does also possess the ability to view multiple futures for some reason, but I'm not saying he's Shibai, okay? But more so that he created him. You see, what's weird about this backstory is that Kaguya's friend who she met upon arriving on the planet said that the god tree had been there for over several millennia, predating Kaguya's arrival. This is then later contradicted by Gamamura, who claims that the god tree fell from the sky, and as if in pursuit being an important word there, Kaguya then appeared. Now this doesn't make sense since per Kaguya's friend, the god tree arrived over several millennia before Kaguya. So what gave him the impression that Kaguya came in pursuit of a god tree that was present thousands of years before she arrived? Well, either the friend is lying for some reason and maybe the tree wasn't there for thousands of years and she just imagined it being there while growing up, which is unlikely. Or it could be the case that Gamamura wasn't telling the truth. You see, if the theory about Shibai also being on the planet proves to be true, then this history lesson by Gamamura has some issues. I mean, even aside from the fact that it doesn't mention Shibai planting the god tree and consuming the chakra fruit, it also doesn't account for Kaguya fighting Ishiki, which it would have also recorded. Now, of course, the real reason for this is the fact that Ishiki and Shibai didn't exist when this backstory was written. But even when doing retcons, you account for what came before and provide a reason why the retcon was missing initially. So in this case, the reason why I believe Gamamura told a distorted history is because Shibai willed it so. You see, if Shibai did ascend with the ability to use omnipotence, which allows him to make anything real, what if he's using that to manipulate certain events? It is interesting that Gamamura's memory stone, which coincidentally has an ability similar to that of Shibai's, showed a distorted history blaming solely Kaguya for everything that happened. It is very interesting that a toad had the stone in the first place, along with seemingly being the first animal Hagoromo noticed could speak. It is once again very interesting that this toad just one day appeared with a plan to take down Kaguya. This leads me to believe that either Shibai created the toad and the memory stone to influence these events, or maybe he manipulated his memories to believe the things that he did. There is also the fact that after failing to defeat Kaguya in physical combat, Hagoromo just magically spawned an ability specifically tailored for sealing Kaguya, which is of course the 6 Paths Shibaku Tensei. This ability stemmed from the Sun and Moon seal that just magically manifested for them to use. Now of course this is just anime logic, but if I was to tailor it to my theory, it does pose some interesting questions. I mean, after gaining this power, Hagoromo now had this variant of omnipotence called Creation of All Things, which allowed him to literally create life itself in the form of the Tailed Beast. Then you have Naruto, who the sage allowed to borrow the Sun Seal, somehow having the power to restore Gai's life force and create a brand new eyeball for Kakashi. So this, just like the Memory Stone, seems to be an offshoot of Shibai's abilities, and they all came into play for one thing, Kaguya's destruction. So this leads me to believe that this might have been a case of divine intervention, which Jura mentions in chapter 13. Shibai needed to stop Kaguya for whatever reason, maybe because doing so leads to the best possible future for whatever goals he has in mind. Now you might say that, if he has omnipotence, why take so many extra steps? Why not just make whatever he wants to be the case a reality? Well, it could be the case that he's unable to fully wield his power over this domain for whatever reason, and he just needs to take small steps to attain his goals. I don't know, just make something up. Now this might be a side tangent in some sense, but I do believe that Ishiki was one of Shibai's followers that subscribed to his ideology. I do find it interesting that just before his soul vanished, he set the code that he cannot allow the Otsutsuki will to be snuffed out as well. Not when they have devoured countless planets and continuously evolved over thousands of years. The way he frames it, it seems as if he's the last Otsutsuki, which isn't the case based on Urshiki's conversation with Toneri. And after he tells him to devour countless planets and evolve into a god, he goes on to say that that is the Otsutsuki will that you shall inherit. It's like he's trying to reinforce what the true Otsutsuki will is, as if there's some other interpretation. This also seems to be the intent of the writer as well, since the word that is highlighted in bold, but only the one that comes before it states what the Otsutsuki will is, not the one that comes afterwards. This leads me to believe that there might be two factions of Otsutsuki. So the ones that move as a collective and bring the fruits they collected back to the clan for some other purpose, and then you have the ones who live to consume and evolve. That of course being the faction led by Shibai. Now I know that Momoshiki was seen consuming a fruit as well, but it's likely that he was simply given permission to do so. So yeah, that's why I think Shibai killed Kaguya. And I know it sounds crazy, but it is plausible, and it might be the case, but we'll see. At number 3, we have Boruto is Shibai Otsutsuki.
Even so. I'm still a shinobi!
Shibai Otsutsuki, one of the most mysterious characters in the Boruto universe. This for the most part stems from him being the definition of overpowered, but there's also the underlying mystery behind his true identity. You see, ever since the character was introduced in chapter 75 of Boruto's original manga, you've had theories about him being the father of Kaguya, Amado's secret identity, or even that Boruto awakened his Jogan by having Shibai cells implanted within him. Now these theories do seem a bit far-fetched, crazy even, but just to be clear, I'm not here to be the voice of reason, because what I'm about to say goes even further. You see, I don't just believe that Boruto possesses the power of Shibai Otsutsuki. I believe that he is Shibai himself, as in his reincarnate. Now all of this really stems from all those theories that pointed out Boruto's connection to Shibai Otsutsuki. Whether it's them possessing similar abilities, Boruto having Shibai's horn, him having the Jogan, and even Momoshiki stating that Boruto strongly inherited the powers of the Otsutsuki. So everything I just mentioned led to this point. This is the culmination. This is the endgame. And of course, I can prove it. Now for this to make sense, let's go back to chapter 13 of Boruto to Blue Vortex, where just before Jura could eliminate Boruto, the bug Shinju known as Mamushi interrupted him. This then led to Jura saying that Boruto is very lucky. It's as if the heavens are decreeing that he must remain alive. Perhaps this is some divine intervention. Now as I said in my review for chapter 13, this isn't Jura outright confirming that a literal god is intervening in these events, but it could also be the case. You see, this isn't the first time Jura alluded to this at some point in the series. If you go back to chapter 4 when the Shinjus first appeared on panel and Boruto later escaped the dimension, Jura once again said that Boruto was lucky. Back then he blamed it on the fact that they just awakened self-awareness, thus overflowing with curiosity and thirst for knowledge, which at that point in time surpassed his original instinctual drive to devour Boruto. So in a sense, the reason why he didn't attack him is because he wasn't ready to evolve, nor did he want him dead yet, which all stems from them having self-awareness, something they've never had before. We could even trace this back to prior events in the series where Boruto should have perished but didn't, such as his fight versus Momoshiki, him defeating Boro, being resurrected by Momoshiki, and even surviving omnipotence. These are all events where Boruto came close to dying, which is typical for the shonen protagonist, but that doesn't mean it also can't be a more significant part of the story being told. Now this is where prescience enters the equation, which is pretty much an ability that allows the user to to see all possible futures. And as explained in chapter 13, this Shinjutsu ability originated from Shibai Otsutuki himself, and that's because Kashinkoji awakened it due to having Shibai's cells implanted into his body. This for some reason has been overlooked, because if this ability originated from Shibai, that also means that he possessed the ability to see all possible futures, which is very significant since he would have been able to see something very important, which is a world void of his own existence. This once again takes us back to chapter 75, where Amado claimed that Shibai is no longer alive. All that exists are his remains. He then went on to theorize that Shibai either ascended to a higher dimension or that he was killed by someone else. Now this is just a theory presented by Amado, but Momoshiki did go on to confirm that he is right about one thing, which is that Shibai is no longer in this dimension. So it could be the case that Shibai did ascend to another dimension, but it could also be the case that he simply died. That's because him ascending to a higher dimensional plane or going to the Pure Lands constitutes the same thing, which is him no longer being in this dimension. So the only thing Momoshiki's statement confirms is that Shibai is no longer alive in the original sense of the word, or the basic sense of the word, but it doesn't explain his current state of existence. Now staying on chapter 75, which is really just the gift that keeps on giving, by the way, but there's another important reveal that took place in this chapter, which is the timeline of Akebi's death, Akebi being the daughter of Amado. This is very significant since the concept of reincarnation requires the act of both death and rebirth, which in most cases happens in close proximity, timeline wise. You see, Amado told Naruto that his daughter died 12 years ago, a few chapters prior, which by itself doesn't seem that important. But then Boruto went on to point out that it's also around the same time that he was born for some reason. This information done by Boruto seems a bit odd since it adds nothing to what's currently being said in chapter 75, which means that it was added for other reasons. Because as I said before, Akebi dying 12 years ago means nothing by itself, and it being around the same time Boruto was born would have been obvious to anyone paying attention since Boruto is 12 years old at this point in time. So why have the character himself point that out within the story as well? What is Ikimoto trying to imply? Well, let's go back to Akebi for a second. What's also revealed in this chapter is that she suffered from a terrible disease. It was an unknown cause, no drug or cure was effective. It was so puzzling that all doctors had given up on it. Now of course, it is possible that she just had a weird illness that led to her death, but what if that wasn't the case? What if Akebi was originally Shibai's reincarnate before Boruto? Now I'm sure you guys are probably like ready to leave the video, and you know that's fine, but at least hear me out before you guys do. By the way, 75% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel, so if you are enjoying the content, drop a like for the algorithm and subscribe for more videos just like this one. With that said, let's get back to the video. Now as I said before, this might sound crazy, I know, but it does make sense. In fact, there's precedence for this being the case in Naruto's original manga. Let's take a look at Ashura and Indra, the sons of Hagoromo Otsutsuki, who somehow found a way to defy conventional death and later reincarnated as Naruto and Sasuke. Now this didn't start with them, these guys have been reincarnating over and over again for the better part of a millennia. So just as how they manifested as Hashirama and Madara prior to Naruto and Sasuke, there were many other lesser known reincarnates as well. They just weren't relevant to the plot itself, okay? Now the reason why that's important to note is because people believe that Ashura and Indra just possessed Naruto and Sasuke, which implies that they're separate entities. Yet if you go with the explanation provided by Hagoromo himself, that couldn't be furthest from the truth. You see, as stated in chapter 670, even after their flesh perished, the chakra the two owned continued to reincarnate across time without vanishing, over and over again. He even goes as far as saying that Ashura has reincarnated as you, which means Naruto is Ashura's current iteration, his next life. What this also confirms is that one's reincarnate can be different from oneself. I mean, the sage himself outright says that Naruto's slightly dumb maverick nature is so unlike that of the previous reincarnates, even Ashura himself. And the reason why that's relevant to Shibai being Boruto's reincarnate is because it explains why Boruto's personality can be different from Shibai's while being an incarnation of Shibai. It also explains why Shibai can reincarnate as Akebi and later reincarnate as Boruto. The flesh itself or the personality of said flesh isn't relevant. The most important factor is the soul. With that said, the soul is also tied to chakra as stated by Hagoromo, which means that both Akebi and Boruto possessed Shibai's powerful chakra. Now this powerful chakra is also what led to Akebi's death because her human body wasn't compatible with Shibai's energy, thus the unknown illness no one could identify. This makes perfect sense when you take into account how Ashura and Indra reincarnated. It was always through their own genetic descendants, that being the Senju, the Uzumaki, and the Uchiha. Even though the conflict itself was more so between the two brothers whose souls reincarnated through chakra, they always chose their own descendants. Why is that? Well, I believe that it has something to do with genetic compatibility or wavelengths. This is similar to how everyone isn't compatible with karma, which is why it took Ishiki over 2 millennia to find a proper vessel. The same applies to the process of reincarnation. So in essence, Shibai reincarnated over and over again until he found a proper body, that body being Boruto's. Now the reason why Boruto is compatible with Shibai and Akebi wasn't is because Boruto won the genetic lottery, which is obviously referring to the fact that his father is a descendant of Hagoromo and his mother is a descendant of Hamura. This means that Boruto possesses the genetic code compatible with an Otsutsuki, at least when it comes to reincarnation. Now this goes a bit further because you could argue that Shibai could have reincarnated within one of Hagoromo's other thousands of descendants from the past, so why is Boruto special? Well, this is all speculation, of course. Obviously this is a theory video, but it is possible that they didn't possess enough of the genetic strand needed to manifest this power. This is also supported in the series, by the way, which came in the form of Kurama revealing that Himawari has a greater affinity to his chakra than any of his other hosts, including Naruto. That's because she has both the bloodlines of Hamura and Hagoromo, which likely manifested the parent chakra or genetic code of Kaguya, thus making Himawari more Otsutsuki than any individual carrier that only possessed one specific strand from either of Kaguya's sons. So in a sense, the same would apply to Boruto as well, making him a successful reincarnate, one that can truly manifest Shibai's powers, one of those powers being the Jogan. Now this isn't anything new when it comes to Naruto. We've seen people being able to manifest another person's power through possessing their chakra before, such as Madara literally awakening Hagoromo's Rinnegan by awakening Hagoromo's chakra, or even Kakashi awakening Obito's Sharingans after being imbued by Obito's chakra. This might sound crazy in any other setting, but in this universe, crazy is the norm. So this is why Boruto's Rasengan Uzuhiko looks similar to whatever Shibai was doing in that one panel. This is why Boruto's horn looks similar to Shibai's instead of Momoshiki's, especially when every other vessel shown so far has horns resembling the person who implanted karma. This is why Boruto strongly inherited the powers of the Otsutsuki, such as the Jogan. It isn't a coincidence, it's all according to Shibai's plan. With that said, what is Shibai's plan? Yeah, he wants to reincarnate, but why? Why did he spend all of that time reincarnating over and over again until he found the right body? But this all goes back to prescience. See, I don't think Shibai willingly ascended to another plane of existence, nor was he killed by anyone. I think he flew too close to the sun, meaning he became too powerful. More powerful than his own body could contain, which led to his death. Now we've seen this in Naruto before as well. Madara was forced to take in the chakra absorbed by infinite Tsukunomi, which led to him swelling as if he was about to burst. This was pointed out by the characters themselves. And then you have the case of Teneri accidentally absorbing the power of the sun, which led to the same effect. So it is possible that Shibai experienced a similar phenomenon after consuming his last chakra fruit, and as a last resort he chose the process of reincarnation similar to Ashura and Indra, likely because he didn't have a vessel prepared. Now it does go a bit deeper than that, since if the argument is that Otsutsukis can't reincarnate successfully in non-Otsutsukis, why did Shibai believe that he would eventually get a proper body? Well, this once again goes back to prescience. You see, Shibai knew that he would eventually reincarnate in a successful vessel because he saw the future in which it happened. All he needed to do was choose that path, his best possible future. That future is now our current timeline. Now this isn't the only explanation because, as I explained before, as a reincarnate, you are that person. So while Boruto is technically Shibai, he isn't the same as Shibai. Similar to how Naruto is Ashura's reincarnate, but slightly different. So for Shibai to return in his truest self, the original Shibai that existed in the past, he has to exist separate from his reincarnates. Now this might seem impossible, but it actually isn't. You see, there's this thing called parallel incarnation, which suggests that a soul can exist in multiple forms or bodies simultaneously, instead of undergoing the traditional sequential process of reincarnation. This idea is different from the more common belief in reincarnation, where a soul is born, dies, and then reborns into a new body over a linear timeline. which would be the form of reincarnation used by Ashura and Indra. So in the case of Shibai, it is possible that he did indeed reincarnate as Boruto, as I stated before, but the original version of him also still exists at the same time, just in another form, which should be spiritual form, likely in another plane of existence. This then opens up the possibility of Shibai actively manipulating the events of Boruto's story to ensure that he's able to fully reincarnate through Boruto's body in his original form. Now this could be for selfish reasons, but it could also be for a greater purpose. See, the Otsutsuki lore is very extensive, and so is the clan itself. As you know, Kaguya, when she arrived on the planet, fell in love with an emperor called Tenji, and later had two sons called Hagoromo and Hamura. Now after she was sealed on the moon by these same two sons, one of them remained on the planet, that being Hagoromo, while the other one went to the moon, that one being Hamura. Now we all know the story of Hagoromo's sons Ashura and Indra creating the Senju and Uchiha clan amongst other bloodlines. So the focus of this section of the video will be on Hamura's bloodline, which would be the Hyuga and the Otsutsuki clan on the moon. You see, Hamura created a pathway between the planet and the moon itself, which is what we see the characters use in Naruto the Last. This simply means that Hamura was able to populate the moon and create the Hyuga branch on the planet by procreating with humans. This would explain why both bloodlines, both on the moon and the planet, all look like regular humans with the added benefit of having Byakugans. This makes perfect sense as it pertains to genetics, since Hamura was already half human, so mating with another human would reduce the Otsutsuki gene over time. Though Teneri, who's a member of the moon branch, still possessed a lot of the traits of the Otsutsuki, and so did his father, which means that his bloodline is likely separate from everyone else's. See, I believe that Hamura not only mated with regular humans, but also an actual Otsutsuki. Now this then brings us to Otehime, the daughter of the Dragon King, who I believe is actually Hamura's wife. Now Otehime is one of the characters from the story of Urashima Taro, the person who influenced the creation of Urashiki Otsutsuki. Similar to how Kaguya was influenced by Princess Kaguya, Momoshiki with Momotaro, Kinshiki with Kintaro, and even Ishiki with Ishinboshi. They're all influenced by deities in Japanese mythology. Though what's important to note here is that the Otsutsuki clan themselves, or itself, is still a driving force in the Naruto world, or in Boruto's universe, and Shibai might be a rogue Otsutsuki. The reason why I believe this to be the case is based on the fact that it's directly stated that the Otsutsuki should procure the chakra fruits and return them to the clan. They shouldn't take them for themselves, or at least there's a limit to how much they can take. This stems from the fact that the only reason why Momoshiki was sent to take down Kaguya is because she consumed the chakra fruit instead of bringing it back to the clan, which means it's illegal to do so. Yet Shibai for some reason went around and devoured so many chakra fruits that he evolved or maybe died, whichever way you want to take it. The act itself should still be illegal in this case, which means that Shibai was likely operating on his own, thus there being no mention of a partner. So what I'm saying is that it is possible that what Shibai is doing could be for a greater purpose, such as going against the Otsutsuki similar to what Kaguya did. Now the only problem with this is the fact that Toneri implied that the Otsutsuki clan no longer existed in Boruto episode 53, but that doesn't make sense based on what Urashiki said about the palace of the Dragon King. You see, the Otsutsukis are derivatives of the Shinto gods themselves, so this family tree shows 3 generations of Hyuga, who was later ruled over by a man named Hori, who later married the Dragon King's daughter Otehime, as I mentioned before. In addition to that, it also shows the entire family tree of the Otsutsuki. So Yamatsumi is the god of the mountains, seas, and wars in Japanese mythology, who later had a daughter called, and I'm going to try here guys, Konohana Sakuya Hime. Now she was known as the Blossom Princess and the goddess of all volcanoes and symbol of delicate earthly life. This is oddly similar to how Kaguya's name also translates to either Blossom or Shining Princess as well, which likely means that Kaguya is a derivative of Konohana Sakuya Hime. I think I said it right there, but yeah. Anyways, this also means that Kaguya's sons Hagoromo, Hamura, and Black Zetsu are also derivatives of Hori, Hodori, and Hosuseri, the sons of Konohana Sakuya Hime. Now this then brings us back to Hori, who later married and had a child with Otehime, the daughter of the Dragon King, also known as Watatsumi or Ryuji, the same Dragon King that was mentioned in Boruto episode 53, when Urashiki sealed away Toneri. What this implies is that if Hamura's backstory is similar to that of Hori, that simply means that he was able to get in contact with other members of the Otsutsukis, one he later had an intimate relationship with, thus creating Toneri's bloodline. What this would also mean is that similar to how Otehime abandoned their child child and husband, the same could have happened to Hamura and his version of the Dragon King's daughter. That would explain why Toneri's and his bloodline possesses more Otsutsuki traits than that of Hamura's other descendants. He simply possesses more of the Otsutsuki gene. By the way, some of this isn't even a theory, since based on Toneri's own dialogue with Urashiki, it does appear that they were once in contact with other Otsutsukis.
It seems that I've found you at last. It took me a while, Lord Toneri Otsutsuki.
So Urashiki, who's an actual full-blooded Otsutsuki from the main Otsutsuki clan, refers to Toneri as Lord Toneri Otsutsuki. That in and of itself is very odd. Why is Toneri, who is supposedly just a descendant of Hamura and some random human, referred to as Lord? It just doesn't make sense. Then Urashiki went on to say that they're from the same clan, which Toneri replied by saying that he thought the Otsutsuki clan's fate was going to end with him. Urashiki then said that the main family doesn't feel that way. This part of the conversation implies that they're both referring to the main Otsutsuki clan family, which Toneri seems to be aware of. However, what's interesting here is that Toneri later said that if they exist, why did they forsake us for 1,000 years? This simply means that Toneri knew about the main family of the Otsutsuki and knows that he's directly connected to them, but for some reason he thought they no longer existed. He thought he was the only one left. What this could mean is that either the text Toneri got his information from got tampered with for some reason and thus not holding the truth of the past, or it could also be the case that the people themselves had their memories altered, thus remembering and passing on a distorted history. This was likely done by the main family of the Otsutsuki branch, who actually kept watch over the sector to some degree, as stated by Urashiki. When I say altered their memories, I'm referring to the ability Kaguya used to change the memories of the humans on the planet, or it could have also been omnipotence. So in a sense, Toneri is likely referred to as Lord Toneri by Urashiki because he's a descendant of the Dragon King's daughter. In addition to that, he's also likely a member of the two families within the branch of the Otsutsuki, one being from Kaguya's father Yamatsumi, and the other being from Hamura's wife's side, which would be Watatsumi, the Dragon King. Now all of this ties back into the plot of Boruto and Shibai, because if the palace of the Dragon King still does exist, and if what Urashiki said about them watching over the sector this entire time is true, that also means that there are other Otsutsukis running around somewhere. Also, if they have the ability to wield omnipotence, such as to change the memories of the Moon Branch, that simply means that you have more than one Otsutsuki god who can rival Shibai. By the way, this was hinted at by Momoshiki when he asked Boruto if he has ever contemplated how many times an Otsutsuki who became a god may have previously manipulated humankind's memories, which at that time seemed very odd. Because what reason would Boruto have to contemplate the effects of omnipotence if this is the first time he's experiencing it? So in universe, it doesn't even make sense to ask Boruto this question, so it was placed there for the audience, obviously. Now before you guys say that Toneri wouldn't have been affected by omnipotence since he would be Otsutsuki, I have thought about this, and while it could be the case, it doesn't necessarily need to be. We have seen characters who are descendants of the Otsutsuki, such as Sasuke himself, being affected by the ability. So clearly you have to be more than whatever percentage Otsutsuki Sasuke is to be unaffected. Now Toneri should be more Otsutsuki than Sasuke due to his great-great-great-great-grandmother's lineage, but it's also still diluted based on who mixed with that bloodline afterwards. It's just not as diluted as the others. Then again, it wouldn't even matter since the point is that omnipotence was used long before Toneri was ever born. So it's not that Toneri was affected by omnipotence, he was just fed false information by the people that were. Now I could be wrong, and maybe Shibai is just trying to rule the cosmos, but he might be a bit more complex, who knows. At number 4, we have Shibai is Lord Jashin.
The power of hope slumbers deep within you.
You mean in this eye?
And with that eye, you will shoulder the fate of this world.
No one knows the true history of the Naruto universe. We think we understand the hierarchy of power, but there's a crack in the mythology, a bloodstained fracture that has existed since Naruto's manga, a loose thread that Kishimoto left hanging, which Boruto is trying to pull together. This all goes back to the destroyed mural, the lost pair of Otsutsuki, and the one entity that grants true immortality. That of course being Lord Jashin. You see, I believe that Lord Jashin has been plotting his return for the better part of a millennia, and it all ties into the web of Shibai, Akebi, Amado, and even the very foundation that this universe is built on, that of course being chakra. Now, this isn't the first Jashin connection theory ever made. In fact, I myself have made videos on this in the past, but the difference here is that I've finally understood the why. I'm going to prove that Jashin is not a made-up cultist deity, but instead an Otsutsuki who disobeyed the rules of his clan and avoided his own extinguishment. Now, to understand where Boruto is going with this Jashin Otsutsuki convergence, we have to look back at the biggest anomaly in Naruto, that of course being Hidan. This guy was a C-list ninja in terms of raw talent. He didn't have a tailed beast, he didn't have a Kekkei, he didn't have immense chakra reserves like Kisame or Hashirama, and yet Hidan possessed an ability that even the greatest medical ninja like Tsunade could not replicate: true passive immortality. Hidan could survive decapitation. He could also survive total body destruction as long as his head remained intact. But the most disturbing part isn't that he survived, it's how he survived. Every major feat in Naruto requires chakra. Regeneration requires chakra. The creation of all things requires chakra. Even Edo Tensei requires a living sacrifice and chakra to maintain the binding. Yet that didn't seem to be the case for Hidan's immortality. He didn't need the sustenance of the Gedo statue or the cells of White Zetsu. He didn't need to weave hand signs or mold chakra. His body just passively performed the function without his input. Now, in the Boruto manga, we have finally been given a name for abilities that defy the logic of ninjutsu, abilities that rewrite reality without hand signs or chakra molding. We call them shinjutsu. Shinjutsu are techniques of gods. Damon's reflection is a shinjutsu. Ada's omnipotence is a shinjutsu. These abilities are sometimes passive, absolute, and divine. Hidan's ritual mirrors Damon's reflection ability almost perfectly. Damon touches you or someone else, and the intent to kill is reflected back onto you physically. Hidan ingests your blood, a biological touch per se, and the physical damage is also reflected back onto you. Both mechanisms bypass durability. Both mechanisms bypass distance. There are two sides of the same coin. Damon reflects the intent before the action. Hidan reflects the action after the connection. This leads us to our first major conclusion. Hidan wasn't using ninjutsu. He was instead accessing a lower-tiered, ritualistic form of shinjutsu. The real question is, where did he get it from? Well, the databooks state that Hidan was the first successful experiment of the Jashin religion. This implies that not only was this a real thing, but also that there were many failures. So the theory or belief that Hidan simply made up the concept of Jashin and his abilities were simply a family trait doesn't quite make sense. The databook itself confirms that this ritual or experiment existed long before Hidan himself. He was simply the first successful experiment. It's also important to acknowledge that one simply doesn't experiment with a prior. You experiment with technology or biology. So someone or something gave Hidan that power. That then brings us back to the mural and the Otsutsuki. In the dimension where Sasuke found the juvenile tentacles, there was also a tablet with 6 symbols. These symbols represent the pairs of the Otsutsuki that have visited this planet, or at least this sector of the universe. One shows Kaguya and Ishiki, the other shows Momoshiki and Kinshiki, and the last one shows the missing pair of Otsutsuki. Amado later revealed the existence of Shibai Otsutuki, a being who consumed so many chakra fruits that he evolved past the need for a physical body and supposedly ascended to a higher dimension. Many believe that he's one of the missing Otsutsukis, which makes sense given his lore. And though Amado said that he fed himself to the god tree, thus resurrecting over and over again, it is possible that he once had a partner, since the Otsutsuki always travel in pairs. So the current theory is that Shibai betrayed his partner, or perhaps his partner was lesser or was meant to be eaten. However, we know that Kaguya turned on Ishiki and left him for dead, and took the fruit for herself. So things can happen that go against what they were meant to do in those positions. So what if thousands of years ago, Shibai and this unnamed Otsutsuki arrived on Earth and battled someone incredibly powerful? Shibai then consumed his comrade, similar to what happened with Momoshiki and Kinshiki, which is why his clothing is tattered, similar to Fuse Momoshiki, and also why he has the black markings on his body. Though this wasn't enough to defeat this person, so they still lost the battle and was likely killed in the process. Now what happens next is really important, because as we're told by Momoshiki, when an Otsutsuki dies, their souls are extinguished. That means they never go to the Pure Lands, Limbo, or any metaphysical plane. Their souls are in essence wiped from existence, which is why they need the Karma Seal to anchor their souls to the land of the living. Now, I'm not sure which came first. Maybe them using the karma is why they suffer this fate, or maybe they created the karma to avoid this fate. In either case, an Otsutsuki doesn't ascend to another plane of existence when they die without a vessel. They instead get wiped out of existence. So what was the deal with Shibai? Well, it is important to point out that Amado's theory on what happened to Shibai is just that, a theory. He never asserts this as the only conclusion. In fact, he outright says that it is possible that Shibai was killed, but also inserts his own hypothesis that he simply ascended. One of these theories is true, and Ikimoto presenting this as vaguely as possible is very intentional. So we're left to put the pieces together and figure out which route is more plausible, which leads me to my main problem with the ascension theory. You see, by itself it does make sense. A guy becomes too powerful and rage quits to ascend to a higher plane of existence. It's very simple and has been done multiple times. The problem is the surrounding factors, such as the Otsutsuki tablet. For one, it's presented to us that the goal of the Otsutsuki is to consume countless planets and evolve into an Otsutsuki god. That is the will that Ishiki passed on to Code, not Ishiki's will, the will of the Otsutsuki. So for all intents and purposes, Shibai's actions would be an accurate representation of that. He devoured planets and evolved into a god. He embodies what it means to be an Otsutsuki. Yet if we assume that one of the symbols on the destroyed tablet belonged to him, it seems as if he wasn't in the good graces of the clan itself. Typically when this happens in any cult or faction, it implies that the member did something they weren't supposed to do, disobeyed some rule, or disregarded some essential custom. It must have been something egregious for them to go to such an extent, and if that is the case, what custom did Shibai not adhere to? Well, I believe that it has something to do with his continued existence, in whatever form he has currently taken. You see, instead of ascending to another plane of existence, I think Shibai was killed by something far more powerful. But instead of accepting his fate, which would have been instant extinguishment, he found a way to cheat death. Not through karmic resurrection, which is the way of the Otsutsuki, but something more sinister. I think Shibai meddled with different forces of nature and found a way to guarantee his survival through blood rituals, which allowed his soul to enter the Pure Lands instead of being extinguished. This, of course, is illegal, which is why his and his partner's stone pillars were destroyed, essentially making them outcasts who disregarded the clan's rules and customs. This is where Kimoto's use of misdirection comes into play. He seemingly had Momoshiki confirm Amado's theory by saying that Shibai was an Otsutsuki and he's no longer in this dimension, but he never confirms the why. Is Shibai no longer in this dimension because he died, or is he no longer here because he ascended? Which one is it? This hasn't been confirmed as yet, and if we assume that Momoshiki knows the truth of Shibai, this dimension that he's currently inhabiting could simply be the Pure Lands or Limbo. It doesn't confirm that he actually ascended. Now, if what I'm saying is true, what I think happened next is the creation of Jashin. Shibai wanted to return to the mortal realm, but he can't manifest physically without a vessel. That's when he created the identity and the cult of Shibai. He found a way to influence humans from the Pure Lands and give them instructions on how to create the perfect vessel for him to inhabit. That is the actual purpose of the Jashin experiments, which is noted in the databook to have been a very real thing. The problem is that finding a vessel isn't easy. I mean, it took Ishiki thousands of years to find his, and while Hidan was the first successful case in the sense that he was able to reproduce some of Jashin's power, he wasn't a perfect vessel, not enough for Jashin to inhabit his body. It is a somewhat similar situation to the case of Jigen and Ishiki. He wasn't a perfect vessel, but he was a vessel. This, by the way, is supported by events in Naruto's manga, as seen with Hagoromo leaving the Pure Lands to bestow power upon Naruto and Sasuke, or even Obito sending his power from the Pure Lands to inhabit Kakashi's body. It isn't a coincidence that Hidan's reflection power is similar to Damon's reflection power, which stems from Shibai. They both come from the same place. It's just that Damon was more compatible. Now this then leads us to Amado's Sanzu. Amado is a man of science, supposedly. He claims to be a simple genius who modified bodies to defeat Jigen, but his tech is very suspicious. He forms cyborgs that are stronger than Jigen. He knows the physiological structure of a god. He has Shibai's DNA. But look closer at his equipment. Look at the device used to regenerate Delta in the Boruto Manga. The Delta pod is marked with a symbol, a triangle circumscribed within a circle. This is the symbol of Jashin. Some dismiss this as a coincidence for years. It's just a geometric shape, they said. But in a series where symbols have meaning, geometry is never accidental. Why would a man of science use the symbol of a cultist god? Well, maybe because they are the same thing. Amado isn't just a scientist. Amado is the high priest of Shibai. For one, let's look at Amado's surname, Sanzu. The Sanzu River is the Japanese Buddhist equivalent of the river Styx, the river one crosses to reach the afterlife. His daughter's name, Akebi, refers to a vine, but it can be linked to the opening of the door to the afterlife. Amado's entire motivation is resurrection. He wants to bring his daughter back, but he isn't using Edo Tensei, which restores the soul. He isn't using Rene Rebirth. He's using karma, the Otsutsuki method of digitizing a soul and overwriting a body. With this in mind, I believe that Amado didn't just find the cells of Shibai. He was guided to it, just as Hidan was guided to the rituals of Jashin. Now the next question, of course, would be why would Amado do this? And the answer to that question is obvious. Maybe Jashin has promised him something even Ishiki couldn't, the true resurrection for his daughter in exchange for a body. We have to remember that karma wouldn't resurrect Akebi. It instead creates a duplicate personality. So while this person would behave like Akebi and have the memories of Akebi, the first Akebi would still be dead. Amado knows this. He himself said this in part 1, which is why I found it strange that he would take this route to begin with. And that is what makes this theory even more plausible. You see, I believe that Jashin realized something really important, which is that he can't simply inhabit a vessel because they possess his data. He needs something that anchors his soul to that person's body, which is the purpose of the Karma Seal. That is where Kawaki and his Karma Seal comes into play. Amado claims to have infused Akebi's data into Kawaki's Karma Seal, but I think the person's data within that Karma Seal actually belongs to Shibai. So when Kawaki implants that Karma Seal onto the clone of Akebi, that karma will proceed to overwrite her cells with that of Shibai. And since Shibai's soul wasn't extinguished, that will allow him to anchor his soul to that vessel. So once the process is completed, Shibai will finally be able to resurrect in his true form, in a body that's tuned to his frequency, a perfect vessel designed just for him. Then he can use omnipotence to bring the real Akebi back to life, or whatever else he's planning on doing. Now, I know some will say, well, if he could use omnipotence to revive Akebi, why didn't he use it on himself? And the answer to that question is that maybe he can't for some mechanic-based reason, which is very plausible. But I guess we'll see. With that said, that's it for the video. I think I went on for a bit too long. I didn't want to, but I just had a few more ideas flowing in that I wanted to incorporate into the theory. Now, it is possible that nothing I said comes to fruition, but the opposite can also be true. So again, I guess we'll see. So those are the best Shibai theories on this platform. And of course, you do have other videos, other great videos from people like Kashikage, for example, so you guys can go check them out. I can't include them in this one because that would be uploading that entire video in this video, which I'm not going to do because that would fall under stealing content, which is something I never do. But yeah, if you guys liked it, drop a like. If you're new, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.